This is a video series on Timesys TimeStorm IDE. Welcome back. Today we will talk about how to debug applications with Timesys TimeStorm IDE. TimeStorm is an integrated development environment that extends Eclipse project. So those of you who worked with Eclipse will be quite familiar with the look and feel of TimeStorm. TimeStorm provides a set of well-integrated development tools specifically for debugging, code coverage, code profiling, memory leak tracking, or code execution tracing on a CPU. We will debug today an application on IMX6 Nitrogen 6X board, which for the purpose of debugging is connected to our host machine via Ethernet and a serial connector. In order to establish a successful application debug session with a remote target, we need both host and a target machine. The debug session starts with a transfer of an application executable to the target. The transfer can happen via TCP/IP connection or serial line connection. It can also be a simple copy. In a second step, we start a GDB on our host. It has to be a target-specific GDB executable. In a third step, we are starting our application under control of a debug monitor called GDB server. We need to point to our host IP address for connection. In a fourth step, we need to connect from a GDB shell to our target. We need to specify a target remote IP address. In a fifth step, we are going to load a program executable with all the debug symbols into a host side GDB. At this point, we can start setting up breakpoints and start controlling a debug session step by step, command by command. With a command line approach, you can see the output from a single command at a time. TimeStorm IDE is going to show you all debug information for a debug context at once. So information such as register values, current context, stack, variables, local or global variables, memory context are going to be visible at once in a single IDE frame. To set up a debug session in TimeStorm for a given project, you start by opening a debug configuration for that project. You double-click on the type of the project that you want to start, in our case a CC++ remote. That will create an entry inside this debug configuration view with multiple tabs. Most of those tabs will be pre-populated with necessary information already. All you have to do is fill out the missing information in tabs that are marked with a red X. At that stage, you are ready to start your debug session. TimeStorm sets up a debug session by transferring executable to the target and then sets up the connection with the host. TimeStorm switches to a debug perspective in which you're going to see multiple views. This is what I've mentioned earlier, that all the debug information for your application will be visible within a single frame. On the top of TimeStorm, you're going to find the control buttons that allow you to control the debug session, so stepping through the code, into the code, and so on. Below, you will find information on stack, threads, cores, on which threads execute, as well as breakpoints. Below that, you will find a text window that presents to you the code that you're executing with a current debug context which travels as you debug your application. On the right hand side, there is several views. There is a visualizer that shows you the information on which core you're executing. There is an outline. There is also an assembler view which allows you to debug assembler code line by line. Above that, you will find also information on registers, variables, breakpoints, so all the necessary information for debugging. Down below at the bottom of the window you will find a console for debugging. Let's see how TimeStorm really does the debugging. To start a debug session, we have to define first a target. We have another video that shows you how to set up target connectivity. Once the hardware target setup is complete, we can navigate to a project, and of course we need to compile it first. To compile our project, we select the project and then we hit this little hammer on top. That's going to do the trick. As you can see, when I expand binaries, I can find here an ARM executable, which is exactly what I need. This ARM executable contains all the debug symbols that are necessary. At this point, I can bring up a debug configuration by selecting Run, Debug Configuration. In this screen, I select TimeStorm C++ Remote and I double click it. When I do that, that's going to create a separate entry for my project. Notice that then entry matches the project name. Most of the tab windows that popped up on a screen are already populated with information, but of course I can add additional info. The tabs that are marked with a red X need additional information, such as Target tab. So let's select Target, and from the drop-down menu we can now pick a target on which we're going to perform the debugging. As you can see, TimeStorm is going to transfer all the necessary files, even if it's multiple executables and libraries. We are now ready to start a debug session. Let's click a Debug button. TimeStorm is transferring at this point executable to the target, and itself switches to a debug perspective. In this perspective, you will find multiple views, multiple windows that are already populated with information. You can see a stack view, you can see a text editor, as well as variables and registers and all the other information. You can see here that this is indeed an ARM set of registers. By default, TimeStorm will stop at the entry to a main function, but we can set up multiple breakpoints in our code just by clicking next to the line where we want the code to break. On the top of the screen we have the control buttons to step over, step into, and step outside of debug context. We can also stop, pause, or resume the execution. So since we have a breakpoint, let's resume. You can see now multiple threads in a stack, and one of those threads has an expanded stack. Information that you will find here is also a core on which this particular thread is executing, which that information can be also seen in the multicore visualizer view of TimeStorm. Note that there is a process ID which corresponds to the one in the diagram. When we click step over a line in a debug context, you can see that all the views are being updated with the latest information. Let's do it again. There we go. In TimeStorm you can also debug in the assembler itself. You can switch to the assembler view and then switch the stepping mode to the assembler stepping. At this point, as I navigate or step through the code, notice that I'm moving in the assembler, not in C++. Let's see. Here we go. I just step through one line of code in the assembler, second, and now third. With TimeStorm, you can very easily debug your applications, C++ applications, as well as libraries. TimeStorm comes with more debugging views than the ones that are presented to you. You can access the complete list and select additional views from the menu. You can see that there is a memory browser view that is not currently open. Let's click on that. In this memory browser, we can punch in an address from a current context that we want to take a look at, and we can click go. Here we go. You can see the contents of memory at that particular address. Okay, so at this point I'm going to remove the live breakpoint by double-clicking it, and I'll complete our debug session. To restart a debug session, it is actually very easy. You click on the last terminated session, you bring up the context menu, and you simply select Relaunch. TimeStorm is going to relaunch the last debug session. Here we go, we are already in a debug session. There's one other way of restarting a debug session. So let me stop this session and let me show you. You see that there's a debug button. You can select the last debug session, and with one mouse click you can relaunch a debug session again. It's very easy with TimeStorm to do development. You simply change the code, and without going outside of TimeStorm, you very easily relaunch a debug session for your application, streamlining your development and debugging. Thanks for watching. Please see our other TimeStorm videos.